and then I just clap. There we go, we started. Cort, it's a little different today, huh?
A little different.
A little different. You want to tell me who you are and how we know each other?
Yeah, my name is Cort, and I was introduced to you through your brother about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
When you were a pretty small kid.
I know, I was a small kid. What do you remember?
Well, I remember knowing of you through your brother and, getting to know him and his friends pretty well. And then different things that we did together. I think we had a gathering at your house where I met kind of his extended family, and that might have been the first time I met you. The first time I got to know you was probably when you were kind of late high school, when I was leading that college group. So that's probably the first time I really knew you as Phoebe, as opposed to knowing you as your brother's,
your brother's sister. Were you there for like a graduation party, you think? At
your house?
Yeah.
No, it was a mission trip. It was
God, that's right.
It was like a training, and it was a really nice day. It was pretty, like there was food. It was kind of like such a nice spot to have a...
I remember this now. Yeah, everybody came over to talk about it before. Yes.
Yeah, I think I did a training there because it was just such a cool place to have a cookout.
Yeah, it's a good cookout spot, I will say.
I don't know if your brother offered it or if your parents did, but your parents were very, very hospitable.
Oh, yeah. Even if it was they're fun.
Even if it was like, yeah, we could do it at my house. Let me ask my parents.
Yeah. That did happen a lot to us. But so my introduction to you was really the college thing in my mind, because I didn't really get to know you personally before that. And who knows what I was doing as a little kid. But I remember about you that I think it was a really big distinction that compared to the other adults there, not that there was anything wrong with them, but when you were around, everybody was so excited to just be in your presence, because I think you, like many other people in the church, were maybe a little overworked, right? There was a lot going on and there's a lot of responsibilities. So you, like many other leaders, were running to pretty much something different every night, sometimes every morning too, depending on what you had to do that week. So any quality time we got with you, either in or out of the church, was, I think, a pretty big deal for everybody. And
that's really flattering.
Not to gas you up, but you're pretty cool. Yeah. But I actually wanted to ask you about the college thing, because looking back now as a teacher, I know that you kind of always have something in the back of your mind that you want your students or whatever to learn. So what do you think you were trying to make us learn at that point?
So at that point, when I began to know you, like before you were just your brother's sister, I'd shifted roles. So when I first met your brother, I was a pastor at that church, and I was a youth pastor, so mainly like high school. And I shifted to work with young adults half-time. And then that's when I really got to do some care and counseling. It was kind of 50% of my job. So one of the things that we were lacking was we had a really kind of vibrant high school, middle school group, and we had a young adult group, but there really wasn't anything for kids that were kind of like in that in-between, that were kind of college, that were a little bit of both. So because I had been the high school pastor, kids like your brother and his friends and kids that age, I had known them when they were in high school when I was their pastor.
Yeah.
So it was just natural to want to put something together. And I think we just created our own thing, maybe a Sunday night, maybe, I'm trying to remember.
I think it was every other week.
It often was part teaching and part let's just goof off and eat something fun and, be silly. And so it wasn't like a youth group per se, but it was very kind of social, as well as talking about life and, teaching things from the Bible. But I guess to answer your question more directly, I really wanted to try to help folks in that part of their life and that stage of their life just translate or navigate all the things that go into being a college student. You're sort of half kid, half adult. Socially, it's hard. Academically, it's hard. A lot of those folks that came to that weren't necessarily in college, and they were college age, and that's a unique experience when you're 19, 20, and a lot of folks are off at school and you're home. So yeah, I think it was just wanting to help them navigate a hard time in their life, be a support for them.
I think you did the job. I think you did all right. Yeah. To go back a little bit too, because that church we were in had such a good high school and like middle school program. I was invited there once. I went and I was extremely overwhelmed because I did not know anybody. And when you're in a big church like that, if you're not in several groups or if you don't go to school with someone, it's really hard to kind of fit in. And I always struggled with that a lot. But also being the youngest of a big family, I loved being around older people because I was just very inclined to be comfortable with that anyway. So when you had the college thing going, I was ecstatic because my brother's friends were my friends. And there was a lot of things that usually in middle school and high school specifically where they separate you by grade.
Right.
And I hated that because everybody else under me it was just either too young or too old of a group I seemed to be in. So it felt like one of the first groups in the young adult life where I felt like it fit in. And that was a huge deal,
That's great.
Yeah. So then I kept in getting involved with that church, and it just so happens that you and I now have something in common, which is just working with kids in ministry. And I think that's actually a pretty big thing because I can tell you from my first experience going there, I remember I went into someone's office that we both know, and he and I sat down and had a sandwich. And I had no idea what was going on. I was like, okay, like, how does this work? And he's like, well, the kids are here tonight. So would you want to go and hang out with them? And I was like, say what now? And at that point, they're like, we'll either put you with the younger kids or the older kids. And I was thinking like, oh, I'll be with high schoolers, obviously, because I'm like a little older now. Little did I know they usually, like, if you're in college, they want you to be with middle schoolers to kind of have more of an age difference there. So I was like, okay. So I went into the room and there was all these other leaders kind of talking to each other. And then there was all the kids on the floor playing, I don't know, some volleyball game or something. And there was one girl by herself. She'll know who she is if she's listening to this. And I remember she was crossing her arms and she was kind of in the corner. And I remember sitting down and being like, hi, who are you? Because I was curious. And she explained who she was. And then she was saying she didn't like someone there. And I was like, well, who? And she told me, and this kid just like had a reputation for that. So I was like, oh, interesting. And then another girl came over and we started talking about that person. And I was like, oh, this is fun. So they started pointing out to people to me and I asked more questions. And then I was like, hey, do you want to play the next game with me? And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And it was fun because especially when kids are at the beginning of middle school, they're still kind of attached to older people in a way that's like very admirable.
Yep.
And it felt really special being like a magnet to kids, and then also too, when they were sad sometimes when they would come or they were really distressed and stuff, just being there as a listening ear was huge. And I remember what it was like to be young and just wanting attention. It was a big deal for me. I was wondering if you could tell me too about what your first experience was ministering and being there for younger kids.
Sure. I didn't grow up in the church. My family was, an Easter Christians, I think we would have called ourselves, but we didn't attend. And it's a little bit of a long story, but I was sort of brought into the church through a tragedy. I have a younger sister. She's 3.5 years younger, and she is fantastic. And she had begun to get invited to this youth group at a church. I grew up right outside of Springfield, Illinois. And so they would go to youth group. She was maybe middle school age. And then she wanted to go to that church on Sunday. So she took my mom. My mom eventually got my dad to go. And then I was sort of, at that point, what was I, 16, 17, 18-year-old jerk. And I wasn't having it. I wasn't getting up. I was too cool for this or whatever. And those kids I didn't know. And by that time, being a junior or senior, I guess I didn't think I needed more friends. But then her best friend, when they were 14, died of leukemia. And she was kind of like a second little sister. Because my relationship with her, I was a pallbearer for the funeral at that church. Just not to go into too much of it, but it was a ton of people there, news cameras. It was a very public battle she had with cancer. And my sister got up and sang this inspirational song, and I was bawling. I was this 18-year-old. At that point, I might have been a freshman in college. And I just saw a strength in her face that I had never seen anywhere else, and I didn't recognize it. And that really was the time where I felt like I became Christian. And that led me to college. I went to a little liberal arts college about 45 minutes out of Chicago. Like you, started working with the youth group. I was just asked by the youth pastor there. He's a really cool guy. We played basketball. I just sort of, again, was introduced to it by going to that church on a Tuesday night to play basketball. Got to know him. My dream of being on the baseball team died coincidentally with him offering that I could help them out. So I just started to go, and it was just, the way I would describe it is I learned, maybe I had always been learning it, but I really learned how fulfilling it is to make somebody's life better, just to make their day better. And at that point, I was young, I was athletic, so all I really had to do was play with them, play some basketball, play some, whatever the game was at the time, just to kind of be an older mentor. I wouldn't say cool person, I almost said that, I was going too far, but Well,
what show you're on is called Cool Ass People, so whether you want that title or not, it's been given
they
to
might
you.
have said that, but
right.
I shrink away from it today. I learned that I was good at it, caring about people, and that led me to being more a part of the church. And then ultimately, I decided I wanted to be a pastor. I felt what I would have called it a calling, and I felt like God wanted me to do this. And I don't know if the rest is history at that point, if I yada out of the rest of it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Was the church that you started getting involved with at first the same church that your sister sang at, or was it a different one?
No, that was a church at college. Yeah, so I was about 3 hours away from home when I went to school. So it was a different church. It was similar denominationally. They're like, I don't know, cousins, I guess. You know?
So how long until after you graduated from that liberal arts school did you get asked to, was it a pastoral role, or do you want to tell me more about that?
That first year when my sister's best friend died, I was going to a community college college at home. So I was still at home, but I desperately wanted, I mean, that is an education motivator. It was miserable. All the worst parts of school and all the worst parts of work combined.
Yeah.
So I got some really good grades, and I was just wanting to get out, and I still wanted to play baseball. I think it was always my God, actually. It was always my religion.
What'd you like about baseball? What felt like it was core to you?
I think I wasn't bad at it. I mean, looking back, I guess I wasn't that good at it necessarily, if you define good as, you know, what other people notice. But I loved the strategy. I loved, you know, I think it just fit me. I was probably a little too slow for soccer, a little too small to be a great football player. Baseball, I thought of all the things I could do that pretty well. And I had two older cousins who I looked up to, I idolized, and they were huge baseball guys. And so I think that was just sort of a natural, you know, maybe I would have been a better soccer player, but I think I wanted to be like them. So that was a big part of it. So that was actually why I went to Aurora, to my college, and got cut, didn't make the team.
Hey.
And, but
Such
it was kind of like
know.
coming out of that experience with my sister's best friend and my conversion. I just happened to visit the school, and I got roomed with guys that were very active in the Christian organization at that school at Aurora. And so when I showed up in the fall, they were the first friendly faces I knew. They were the first friends I made. And, you know, that group made me feel like I'd never felt before. I had always grown up really quiet. I was athletic, so I played football, baseball, basketball. I had athletic friends. I knew people who were cool, but I was nowhere near. We didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't cool for my money. I wasn't cool for my looks. I wasn't cool for my sporting ability as much as I wished I would have been. So I was pretty quiet and wasn't really a part of any one group. And so when I got to that college, that group made me feel like a cool kid transferring in from out of town. And I think that really solidified an identity for me, that I feel good about this person that I'm becoming. I feel good about who they think I am. And part of who I became was that kind of caregiver, pastoral person, whether it was my peers at college or then, you know, working with the kids. So I actually spent 2 straight summers. We traveled around the Midwest on a team of like 4 college kids and a real adult. And we would help these little bitty churches. I mean, we're talking like 100 people, 50 people. We'd help them put on Bible school for their little kids and any, you know, kids in the community. And then we would do stuff with the kids at night. And especially I was voted the quietest in my senior class.
No, you were. Not you.
Absolutely. So it was really cool because I started getting asked to speak, to teach. You know, there was always kind of a lesson part to that youth group.
Did that make you want to freak out?
At first. But I mean, something I'll never forget, when I was at that little community college, I had to take a speech class, and this guy, you know, it was local community college, so a lot of like local high school kids would go there. And this kid that was a year older than me, he was a soccer player. I always thought he was really cool. I remember the time in the line for the lunchroom, he asked me like, dude, why don't you wear better clothes? And I never had anybody ask me anything blunt like that, but he wasn't being mean. He was just like, all these girls, they would be interested in you if you'd stop wearing sweatpants and like put on a nice shirt. And I'm like, really? So like he was just always that, like I still remember that, you know, 40 years later. So I was really looking up to him, thought he was really cool. And I had that speech class. He was in my speech class. I gave a speech on the tornado that my family was in when I was a little kid. And, you know, some of it was just teaching about tornadoes, but I guess I started to talk about my own experience and not preach necessarily, but just talk about something passionately. And after that class, again, he came up to me and was like, you need to be doing that for a living. And he's telling, like a year ago, I was at that point, I had just been voted quietest in my class.
Yeah.
So to have somebody that you look up to or you think is cool tell you that you're good at something, I still remember that, you know, how many 100 years later. So then have that in my mind and spend those summers getting the opportunity to like plan a lesson or plan a talk, put it together. Sometimes you do it and you fall on your face and nobody gets your jokes. Your message doesn't come across. And so you kind of learn from those stumbles. But then there are other times where people come up after you and say, wow, that was really great. You know, I appreciated what you said here, what you taught there. And that was another great feeling. So you combine, you know, I had never felt anything better than making somebody's day better or being kind to them or supportive to them. And then having people tell me that I can speak for a living or I can teach for a living. That led, I think, to a pretty easy decision to want to do that for a career.
Yeah, I could see why. It's so interesting too, because, you know, with what you do in your work, it really is about listening and being self-aware and helping other people kind of get to that self-awareness for themselves, right? We're not trying to give someone an answer. We're just trying to ask the right questions.
Right.
And it's kind of cool to hear that you did have someone at, you know, the ripe age of, you know, early college days to say, hey, you know, I noticed this about you. And I also noticed that about you.
It's huge.
Yeah. And I didn't realize how huge that was until someone told me something like that, where I didn't see myself in a certain way. And someone I did not know at all spent about 5 minutes with me and said, don't underestimate Phoebe, and Phoebe's a writer. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't write. I barely read a lot growing up. Like, there was so many people that were very fascinated by those types of like literature and things. And I always struggled with those subjects. So I just thought it wasn't me. It wasn't in me.
Well,
And,
they saw it before you did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that must have been huge. Must have been huge. Could you tell me what it was like getting accepted to a church and what that type of community was, what it felt like at the time?
It was incredible. I mean, I look back and those are probably, I had the 1 year at community college. So I had 3 years at that college, 3 of my favorite, best years of my life. And there were just a lot of circumstances that came about, because half of that time I thought I wanted to be a teacher, because I thought, again, I think that would have fit all the things that I'm describing. Part of that traveling, I think we called it summer ministry, part of that traveling group, we would go to camps and be kind of counselors at these Christian camps and do a lot of teaching, a lot of, be the counselor for kids. And one of the things that always stuck out to me that I've always remembered is there was this kid from Wisconsin, and we had gone to his town to do the normal weekly thing that we did. And then he was also at the camp for this particular event. After one of the speakers, their message, he was in the pew crying. He was like in the row. Everybody kind of left, and I had noticed. And I think that's the other thing that I liked, is I liked attending people who were, hurting and trying to make that better, or, be kind to them, because I think I didn't necessarily have a lot of that growing up. So I had some bullying and whatever when I was a kid. So I think it's attractive to me to want to talk to somebody who's not having a good day or not having a good moment. And I knew him. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go see how he's doing. Maybe somebody kicked him. Maybe a girl broke up with him. And he was upset because he was pretty inspired to go home and kind of serve his community, but he lived in a pretty small town. It's a pretty small church, and he knew he was going to go home and do that alone. He didn't have a youth pastor. He didn't have a youth group. And I just was like wrecked with this feeling of responsibility. And I guess that's what I would now kind of describe as my calling. Is I remember I called my parents from a payphone at that camp and told them I was going to be a pastor. I was emotional, crying. I told the whole camp. And it made me feel a part of something. It gave me an identity. And I guess that became a little bit of a double-edged sword that maybe we'll get into, but it felt great to feel like there are people who know you, who care about you, who believe in you, who appreciate you, who esteem you. Yeah, it was fantastic. It was a great feeling. And then that led, I knew I didn't know enough to be a pastor, so that led to a decision. I thought I had to go to seminary to kind of catch up on all the Bible learning that I hadn't had my whole life. So right out of college, I decided to go to Boston to go to Gordon Conwell.
How would you describe seminary to someone that doesn't know what it is?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, if somebody came to planet Earth and wanted to understand what a seminary is, it was a Protestant seminary. So it felt like a grad school. So it would have felt like a normal college probably, but smaller, because it's, I think maybe they had 4 programs, 4 or 5. So maybe it's a school of 200 or 300 or 400 people. And it was in a beautiful north of Boston area. It was in a monastery, like a place that had been a monastery. So it looked huge. It had a huge chapel and it had dorms, and it had a new building with lots of classrooms. So you walked in and they had a new in 1994. So it's not new anymore, but it wasn't like you were in a place with monks or torches.
Yeah.
It just looked like a grad school. And it was really good for me, because I think, not only did I do a ton of learning that I hadn't been exposed to, but, as I came to learn, there are jerks even in the church. And some people just want to be right. Some people want to put others in their place. So sometimes around lunch, around dinner, it was almost like these little rams that were like butting their horns, arguing theology and philosophy, and mostly, I would say 90% kindly. But, they weren't always the ones that got it started. But that was really good, because it made me sort of defend the things that I was learning, or the things that I thought that I was, perspectives that I thought I was adopting. I still remember to this day, there was a class that I did not agree with anybody in the class. And I just kept reading the book they assigned, and I'm like, I think this guy's full of crap. So I was never much of an academic, but one of my proudest moments, I guess, back then was this guy challenged me in front of everybody at the little dinner table. It was like a cafeteria. And I was able to be like, well, he's like, have you read this guy? And I'm like, yeah. And on page 135, he says this, which I think contradicts what he said on page 230. And like, that was so not like me, but it was great to feel like I was growing towards, maybe strengthening some weaknesses that I had, because I knew I could be kind of that caregiver of a pastor, but I needed to know what I was talking about too.
Wow, that's fascinating too, because I mean, think about you in college and before that being told that you were the quietest person in the class, and then having these moments where you are really kind of, again, that word comes up, like feeling called to stand up. And I think most people are going to seminary too with a wanting to understand the truth of what the Bible is, right?
Yeah.
And the different aspects of how people come at it. But yeah, to have those things challenged and to say, yeah, no, I will stand up for the things I believe in. So that must have been really world changing for you at that time too.
Yeah, for sure. And I was around some brilliant people. I mean, I can remember driving with this older guy. He was driving up the Main to pick up his girlfriend. And like that car ride, I probably should have paid him for it because I learned just so much, talking to him, and he was asking me questions about this and that and the other thing. And it was great training. So I was there for 2 years, I can't remember, but
At
really
seminary?
formative years. Yep.
Okay.
But my goal was always to work with kids. And so that, that led me to look for a full-time job at a church, being a youth pastor. I never had the dream of, like, sometimes in the church culture, there's this, you start with kids, you work with high school kids, you work with older kids. And then once you're old enough, you can get the big office. And I was never interested. I felt an empathy for kids. I felt like that was a really hard time in my life. And I thought, because of my experience, my pain, not that it's comparable to like real pain, I wasn't abused or anything like that, but I just felt like
Pain
I
comes
could
in
do
many
it.
forms.
Yeah. And so that was all I was really interested in. It took me a while, but I spent maybe a couple of years looking for that first job and married my wife, and we found it. And that started my job as a pastor. Is there anything you want to redo? I feel
No, you're doing great. If there's anything that I think needs to be cut, I'll do that later. It's no problem. All right, so Cort, so you said you married your wife and then you got a job in ministry at a church. Could you tell me about that church and what the community was like there? Before we go on, I think community is kind of the through line that I found talking to you before this. So I really want to get like kind of a full picture in your mind of what it was like to experience that community that you found yourself in at your first job.
I would say, before I talk about the church community, my in-law community has been the most, I don't want to say more than others because maybe somebody would be offended, but there's nothing more important to me than that. And so my wife is incredible at building community. Her family's incredible at it. So I think that the two of us moving to Pennsylvania to take this job at the church we went to, much of that community was because of her. So we went to this town. It was like 30,000 people. It had a lot of inner city struggles, poverty, crime that Philadelphia had. And then it was surrounded by these horse farms that were incredibly wealthy. So it was a really strange paradox that you were constantly driving in and out of. And the church that I started with, these dogs are excited.
I know. Hey, wow.
The dogs are.
Well, wait a second. It's good.
When I was hired, they had just moved out of the city into the suburbs, and it had built a brand new building. I mean, that's part of what was attractive. Was I thought, wow, like new resources, it was a new building, and it was kind of a new position. They only had like 3 kids that were coming to anything that resembled a youth group at that point.
Wow.
And so it felt really kind of cool to be able to build something from the ground up.
How big was the church in general?
Maybe a couple hundred people, maybe 200.
Okay.
Something like
wow,
that.
That's like so few kids for a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
That's insane.
The church was transitioning because they were moving out of the city. It really was changing in a lot of ways. So I was showing up right almost after that change, or in the midst of that change. And so, I mean, I definitely credit my wife. The two of us, they got 2 for 1. Like, she was so engaged, especially, I think I was 27. I just had to be careful about boundaries working with high school girls and whatnot. And so she was just so good at being that partner where we could kind of tag team, talking to kids, teaching kids, helping kids, working with kids. Whenever there was a time where kids were excited to see me, they were 10 times as excited to see her. She was kind of my number one volunteer. It was great at first. The church was kind. They were excited about having me. We were excited about that part of I'd never lived in that part of the country, but it was a nice area. We liked being close to a city and still being in the suburbs. Like, if you basically took a left, you were in Amish country. You took a right, you could go to Philly. It was really, really cool. And we made really, really deep relationships with folks there really quickly. Parents of the kids that were in the youth group would volunteer, we'd befriend them. And then the senior pastor treated me amazingly. He almost adopted me, I guess. He would refer to me as his third son. And so we were flying high. It was a great experience. I was a very patient student, so I was always wanting to get out of the classroom and try things out. So it was great to try some things. I think it was the second summer I was there, I created like a little bitty conference. I thought it was so cool that, I'd seen these conferences happening around the country and I was going to create mine. So I had like quote unquote guest speakers from the town and, they'd come up and talk about something different that kids are dealing with, something different that kids might want to learn. And then we'd also do fun stuff to make sure they weren't bored to death. And, I think that was the first time we'd ever taken them to a kind of a pretty cool summer camp where they got to same thing, have fun, make friends and, learn more about, what we wanted them to know, which was, that God loved them and that they were okay.
Yeah.
All the things that happened to us in life and all the mistakes we make, like that's okay. Doesn't make you undesirable. In fact,
Wow.
God still loves you. So yeah, we were flying high. It was an amazing year and a half until it wasn't.
Yeah, right. Well, we can get into that in a little bit, but something that's different about you and I, first of all, is that I grew up in a church. So the day one I was there, like my mom said, the first time she saw me walk was in church. Apparently everybody was closing their eyes and I just decided to walk off because I didn't want the attention. So many first memories of my childhood were revolved around church, and something I remember a lot because of growing up in that situation is the call to action was so large, because obviously the church kind of deals with all big issues, and especially it's centering around family and community, and really at the core belonging, because what Christ is supposed to offer us in these churches is to belong to a community, to belong to a God, to have a father. Like that was really big for the people I met that didn't have a father figure or didn't have a parental guidance or love. And something that you obviously did, and many people like you had to leave an area, even if they did have a community at that time, which I know for you came later in life, but you then had to like uncling from those things that you knew and really go off on a whim to say, yeah, we will try and make community with these people we've never met before.
Yeah.
And also be in a city or a town that we've never lived in before, and everything is different. And so to have a church reach out and make you feel welcome immediately, which happens with many churches, they're very good at that. And there's so many good people in the church. It does change you a lot, and it makes you want to cling to those things so much more.
No question. Yeah. The more I think about that, the time at that church, it's bittersweet because, I talked about how that community I found in college was so meaningful. I did have a community, a smaller one, but I had great friends at Seminary. I married into amazing in-laws. I mean, I absolutely won the lottery with them. And then, my wife and I, we decided, well, let's go try and make a community in this new place. So that, I guess I hadn't thought about that. And I think the thing that was so important is, that felt like it gave me a sense of myself. It gave me a sense of being competent at something, being important to people. There was only 4 or 5 people that worked in the church. So it wasn't like there was an office building of people that might recognize you or your talents. But on Sunday or on Wednesday, when people would come, that would happen. You'd have a couple hundred people come and know your name. It gave me maybe a false sense, but a sense of esteem, of being important. And I wish that I could have understood how unhealthy that was, because it was so external. I was so externally validated. I didn't have a lot of, at that point, internal validation. And
You mean
so,
from yourself?
Yeah, like I was definitely a people pleaser. It's one of the reasons maybe coming out of being bullied or whatever as a kid, being a quiet kid, I constantly wanted to morph into, being acceptable by whatever group I was. And I still had standards. Like I didn't do things I didn't want to do, but I would act in ways that I thought people wanted me to act, or, do things that as long as they were acceptable, I didn't mind masking who I was or morphing into who I wanted them to, who I thought they wanted me to be. And that happens incredibly intensely at a church, especially when you're a leadership role. I mean, at that point, it was just a senior pastor and me. And so we were kind of the only two, what they would have called pastoral staff. So I was kind of the vice president, so to speak, even though I was working in the barn, It wasn't like I was working with adults that much, but still it gave me a sense of being at least a kind of a sergeant in this community, being somebody important. And, looking back at that, I think the thing that I regret the most is I didn't understand it at the time. I was still like 27. I consider myself back then still a kid. One of the things that was happening, it was a Baptist church, and Southern Baptists are Southern Baptists, and then Northern Baptists are called American Baptists. But really, that because of the Civil War, they split. They used to all be Baptists. But this church in that denomination was going through another denominational split, and the core idea, the core fight was over homosexuality. And I can remember disgustedly at myself feeling very strong that, I was on the right side. I was on the side of my pastor, my church, my denomination, and we had to protect that from people who were trying to introduce something that wasn't right, that was
Right,
It's
the
not
opening
acceptable.
to the world sort of aspect. Because for me, I know there was a lot of like, you are in the world, you are not of the world. You are
Right.
in the world, you will not be of the world.
Right.
And the way I was described to it is homosexuality, specifically in the LGBTQIA community, was the world.
Yeah.
And that was not to be a part of. And it was not natural. It was all these things that I know most of us listening could probably either understand or have heard before when going into a church building. So that
Yeah.
must have been a huge split. What did that do to the church?
Well, it was more like church against church. So
Oh,
it was
I
like
see.
sections of the country were splitting
Right.
the denomination. But I think the thing that I'm ashamed of is there are definitely moments in my life where I've taken that stand, where I've only ever almost gotten into 2 adult fights in my life since 7th grade. And they were both times a good friend of mine was being, was about to be attacked, basically. And I felt just this sense of protection, right? I just wanted to protect something or fight something that was wrong. And even in seminary, that conversation at the dinner table, I felt like what they were teaching or what they believed was wrong, and I was willing to kind of stand up in front of a bunch of people that I thought were probably smarter than me, maybe more educated than me, but I just thought this is wrong and I'm going to speak against it. And I think that because that identity, because that community, I guess social identity was so important to me at that church, I mean, I might as well have been blind. I might as well have been blindfolded. Like, I didn't allow myself to consider the position. It was just automatic, without thought. This is what I'm supposed to believe. I'm supposed to support my pastor. I'm supposed to support the denomination. It's kind of sort of that corporate idea that, you can disagree privately, but publicly you have to toe the line. I didn't even give myself the opportunity to think about it. I do feel that shame that I accepted and trusted that because of who they were, because of what they said they wanted to do, help people, make people's lives better. It didn't occur to me to think, they're making people's lives miserable. They're just not paying attention to that, or they're not speaking to that. But, I was only focused on the side of the struggle where we were trying to help people. I wasn't at all even giving myself the time or the ability, the permission, I guess, to consider how many people were getting hurt. And that's a huge regret.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're a type of person that goes into, you're literally, I mean, anyone goes into ministry mostly because they want to help people. And I think most of us do not want to hurt anybody. And when we do, it's very easy to make excuses for ourselves because we know what our hearts are and we know the best parts of ourselves, even if we're not giving that out to the world at that time. So I think that is extremely human to want to stay with your community. Tribalism comes into that, right? You want to stay with your tribe. You want to make that tribe strong, and you want to know that you are support and not a hindrance to that. But speaking of tribe, I was wondering, before we could get to kind of where it goes sour, what would you say are the sweetest moments you had with some people in that church? What made you really cling? Or just feelings, if you don't have a specific moment.
No, I think people were willing to be my friend. I think that's, since then, or after that, I spent 17 years as a pastor. That's just unique. A lot of times there's sort of a distance to leadership. There's an isolation to it. And people there, I can remember 2 or 3 guys in particular, and one family of one of those guys. I mean, they could not have been friendlier. I think if we had stayed there, those people would have become like family. And we stayed in touch with them for, a decade or 2 afterwards, because it was just so sweet to get to be cared for and to get to live life with them. And yeah, I think getting to see so many kids get drawn into the message that I wanted them to hear, I still think that half of my message was good, that I wanted kids to know that they were okay, that they were, valuable. And so, those 3 kids turned into, I think in a year we had 80 or 90 kids coming on a regular basis. It just felt good. And I don't want to measure success by numbers, but there was a lot of quality there too. It was really...
Right. You feel that, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, it was really great to see that and experience that.
Well, I think those are all good things, too, because especially if you're in a church as a kid, I can tell you, because I've been to very small churches that did not have good programs for children, it really sucks. It really sucks to go to a church where it's all old people and all they want to do is talk about how little you are, which is like, it's fine. It's very understandable. But when there is not a place for the children, where are they supposed to go? Where are they supposed to fit in? Where are they supposed to be heard? Because especially in the generations that raised us, it was very much you respect and you honor the adults, but you're not really supposed to have an opinion on things because you're too little for that. So to have an adult say, no, your opinion does matter, and we are interested who you are now. And we're also interested in involving you in the future and giving you a chance to have a bigger future than maybe you would have even pictured. It's pretty special. I can tell you from the other side that there are kids that are full grown adults right now that think of you in that way. And that's pretty cool. That is pretty cool.
That's very cool. I always wanted kids, I think a lot of people look at kids in a church and they want them to be distracted and they want them to be entertained. I always wanted kids to be cared for. I wanted them to feel loved. And so all the mistakes that I might have made, at least they were made in that effort.
Also, to anyone listening, if they think they haven't made a mistake, wake up. Come on. Get real. So now we're going to turn into the sour part, all right? So I was wondering if you could tell me kind of if there was any moment of change that that sticks out to you and what that was like going forward.
Yeah, so it was a pretty life-changing time for me and my wife. So in August of that second year that I was there, my dad died suddenly back in Illinois. He was just playing tennis, had a heart attack, and died before he hit the ground. So completely unexpected. He wasn't that old, 62 years old. So I, was devastated, went home, kind of cared for my mom, tried to help her find her bearings. Nothing really prepared. So if anybody's lost a loved one, especially if they are a breadwinner, you got to find bank account numbers and you got to find insurance policies and you got to figure out like all the things that he was doing to take care of my mom. How are we going to make sure those are taken care of and how she's taken care of? And I live, 11 hours away. So I was gone for 2 weeks to try to sort all that out. And when I came back, we were supposed to go to a wedding. My wife's cousin was getting married and we'd been planning that for months. But I had missed 2 straight Sundays and this was going to cause me to miss a third. And I was told I couldn't go. And I think that was I still remember being in that office. And there was a conference room table in the office and sitting there. And I think that was, when I talk about the blindness that I had experienced for so long, not allowing myself to consider, is this right? Is what I'm being told, is my community one that represents who I want to be? Or am I just glad to be in a community and I'm not going to question it? When that conversation happened, that really took some of the scales off my eyes where I was like, wow, this really isn't maybe what I thought it was. So basically the short story of that is something had happened over the summer that I wasn't aware of. Evidently, things had started to sour towards me from that pastor and his wife and maybe people around them. I can't explain it. I have theories. They're all just conjecture. I've talked to people afterwards. Some people think there was some jealousy there. Some people thought maybe I was going to go after his job because things were going so well. I never had any idea of that or any desire for that, so that didn't make sense to me. But for whatever reason, I just became mired in what I would call now a time of spiritual abuse. That person and those people used their place of spiritual authority to make my wife and I feel awful. I can remember getting called into the office that fall, maybe a month later, because homecoming would have happened. And my wife is just the greatest person that's ever lived, I think. And just out of the goodness of her heart, she had some girls come to the church because so many of them didn't have a lot of money, wanted to look nice for homecoming. And she's really good at kind of cutting hair or whatever you would call it for women. Styling hair, that's a good word. Yeah, there you go. And so she offered, girls want to come by, I don't mind, helping you and helping style your hair. So maybe half a dozen came and, they fixed them up and styled them up and they went on their way. And then that next week I got called in the office and berated that I was undermining the work that the church was doing that was anti-dating. I didn't know the church was doing that was anti-dating, and I didn't think this had anything to do with that. But from there, I was told that people were leaving the church because of me. There's only 2 or 3 of us working in the church, and I'd get sent memos to kind of create a paper trail that I was failing. And that continued for about 4 months. And I feel like I'm a pretty resilient person, and probably in that case, I was too resilient. I kept trying to figure it out, kept trying to make it better, kept trying to please. And I think that comes from that sense of, I can't lose this community. When you tie your identity to something social or something outside of you, it is incredibly damaging to lose it. And so I was doing everything in my power not to lose it, not to lose that identity. And by the time, I think it may have been, we went to my in-laws for Thanksgiving, and I don't even remember what it was, but I was blamed for something, and it was something big. And so I reached out to this family to apologize, and they didn't know what I was talking about. And I just thought, what in the world is going on? So I asked for a meeting. Churches are usually run by boards, so I wanted to meet with the board with the full intention of reconciliation. How do we figure out what's going on and make it better? I think that meeting lasted 4 hours. I still can't believe we were there till like 2 a.m. and they had my resignation already printed. They came into the room with it. And so, I was super naive about whatever it was that was going on. And I was desperate to hold on to that sense of community. And so basically I had to resign. I remember going home back to our apartment and just weeping with my wife because I hadn't just lost a job, right? I think that would have been hard enough, but I felt like I'd lost a big part of who I was. That's the whole idea of how kind of double-sided or double-edged the sword can be for a community, is because I felt like I didn't know who I was coming home, and I thought I'd lost everything. And the way that they did it, they told me they'd give me 3 months severance if I didn't talk to anybody, if I didn't see anybody. So I couldn't really even tell the kids that I was leaving. I couldn't tell the friends that we had made that I was leaving or why. I mean, it was basically what I experienced as an abusive process. So that really changed my life, changed the way I think about the world.
Well, it's interesting too, because, in that situation, it's really abandonment, especially when there's kind of almost like a flip of a switch and you don't understand why everybody all of a sudden is not so happy with you anymore. And then in return, they really kind of made you abandon the community that you had worked so hard to build. And
they scared me. I think that was that's the other part of abuse, is it's always scary. I had this young wife, like she was working part-time. We didn't have any money. And so the severance it might as well have been $1 gazillion because I didn't know how we were going to eat. And, I think if anybody listens to this and has a spiritual perspective, like I underestimated, whether you want to say I underestimated God or I underestimated people, the people who cared about us before I could even ask. They were supporting us, helping us. The money they were going to give to the church, they gave to us. Like we probably made more money, I hate to say it, in a week, because people were just like, we're going to get you groceries, we're going to get you this, we're going to get you that. They came to our house. They would just plan parties at our house for us. We're like, we're all coming over, just get ready. So I think that's the other thing in those dark moments, right? When it feels hopeless, when it feels helpless, it feels alone. It definitely felt alone. And I wouldn't argue with anybody's feelings that ever feel that. But it's so important to take that breath, take that pause, and remember you're not alone. There is somebody, whether it's in your community or there are people in this world who I like to think that I'm still one of them. They will just help you because you're a human and you have value. And man, they really did that for us. That was probably 6 months before I had my next kind of real job. And we never missed a rent payment. We never missed a meal. Like we had tons of community because they just, I don't mean this in a bad way, they forced themselves upon us because I was scared to death. Like, oh my gosh, am I going to lose the severance? And they're like, basically, screw the severance. Like, you're okay. You didn't do anything wrong. We care about you. And it was great. It was fantastic. And so I think, like, when I say that changed me, it changed me from a naive standpoint. Like, I understood the world better in a bad way, but also, looking back on it, it taught me that there are good people who just care. It's not transactional. Like, they just care because they want to be people who care.
Yeah, they are actually being the community that they said they would be.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm coming back.
This was such a nice spot. It's a really great day.
It is. Okay, so before we move on from that part of your life, I wanted to ask you specifically, why would you, because I'm guessing there was probably some paperwork that was signed and things that happened after that meeting. Could I ask why you didn't feel like you could speak up and just say your piece? I mean, I know the severance part of it, but did you consider ever just being like, no, don't give me the severance. I need to speak to the church about this because the real community will speak up for me. Did you have those feelings, or what was that like?
So the last couple of months of that spiritual abusive stage that we were going through, I had some great mentors. That youth pastor that I talked about back when I was in college, who had first asked me to help. He married my wife and I. He's always been somebody that I've really looked up to and respected as a mentor. And then I had an internship with a different guy, different pastor who I'd kept in touch with. And I'd been talking to them every week for a couple of months. So when I got home that night after that horrendous meeting, I think I might have called them really late and told them what happened. And they said, you have to find a way to say goodbye to those kids. Like, they're going to think they did something wrong. They're going to take, and I understand that better now, educationally, but, kids, they have a hard time believing that something's happening outside of their impact or their responsibility. And so, I reached out as hard as it was. I reached out to that pastor who had fired me, or, I'd just resigned, and I begged them to reconsider. Could I at least just say goodbye to the kids? Could I explain that whatever's happened has nothing to do with them, that I, still care about them, I'm not abandoning them. And so we ended up in another meeting with that board. I think there was more of them there. And I think that meeting, as I think back on it, that was really formative for me too, because I watched people who I liked, who I trusted, who I had worked next to for a year and a half or 2 years, I watched them shrink from a leader in the room without any sense of their own, without any, kind of what I had done, I guess what I was describing about the homosexuality issue and the church split. I didn't allow myself permission to question that. And then I, in that meeting, watched whatever it was, 10 or 12 professional. I mean, these are people that, the board that runs the church. I knew they could be kind. I knew they could be thoughtful. I knew they could be generous. And they didn't allow themselves, in my opinion, they didn't allow themselves even to consider that what he was saying was false. And he tried to claim that I had a mental illness in that meeting, that he wanted to send me for treatment. And so I spent the meeting, instead of being able to advocate, hey, the only reason I'm here is can I say goodbye to the kids? I spent the meeting defending, my health and wellness. And again, I think I was pretty naive coming in, still trying to make things right with this community and not understanding the way that people can be when they are motivated and when they, I guess, feel threatened for whatever reason. So I think that created a lot of fear, I guess, going forward. Is I was afraid of how that meeting went. I was afraid of how people who I'd been with for a couple of years looked around and nodded and said, yeah, maybe this is a pathology. Like they're pointing to the meeting itself, like my want to go say goodbye to the kids. They tried to frame that as some kind of a sign of a pathology. And I'd love now with my education to go back and like wipe the floor with them. Academically, I mean, like from an educational standpoint, understanding standpoint. But at that point, I mean, I may have been 28 at that point, so I was still pretty young and I was scared. And so for those next 3 months, I was, definitely scared of the money. I felt like if we didn't have my salary for 3 months, if we didn't have it immediately, I didn't know how we'd survive. And I didn't trust people or, trust God that I'd be okay. And then, I mean, I don't know how much to get into this, but there were some incredibly awful things that came up over the next couple of months. A couple of people that we'd befriended received letters anonymously saying that my wife and I had done awful things. And they brought them to us because they cared about us. And like, do you know what this is about? What's going on? And they were clearly fabricated. They weren't done very well to make it sound like they were written from who they were written by. And they were accusing us of awful, awful things. And we talked to a lawyer, and the lawyer, his advice was, you can't look into this. It's not going to go well because how are they going to find who did this? But it was provocative enough that like that just created this incredible fear for us that, we went from being in this community to now feeling like being too close to this community was incredibly dangerous. And so, yeah, I wanted to, that was a case where I wanted to show that side of me that wants to stick up for what I think is wrong or against something that I think is wrong. And I was made to feel afraid. I mean, again, at 53, I'd be more than glad to engage in that. But at that point in my life, with the insecurities I had personally, I just lost my dad 6 months earlier. I think that, again, we can't underestimate the identity that we put in our parents and our family. And I didn't know who I was without him for a long time. So all of those things conspired in that time period where, whether they intended to, they took advantage of me being kind of weak, scared, frail. And
fear is a very strong emotion too. I think everybody could relate to that, where it seems so simple, maybe outwards looking in, being like, well, that is the truth. But you're kind of working in a system where the truth at that point doesn't really matter, Yeah. And I mean, that's where that
was the lawyer's advice. He's like, it doesn't matter what's true. We're not going to be able to prove that this isn't, and this is going to go really badly for you if you bring it to like the police's attention.
Right. And who would a church listen to more aptly? Their pastor they've had for maybe a decade or so, or whatever it is, person of authority who's older and has more experience in the church, or some kid that has good meaning sometimes but is still very young, you know?
And I think that's, like, we're talking about community, and I don't think we can detach community from identity. And I think that experience was creating a new identity for me. And I kept those letters, those 2 letters that the people brought us, I kept them in my office at my next church. I think they might have even made it all the way out to Connecticut. I kept them for years because I was afraid, and there was nothing more freeing than when I finally threw them out. I finally said, I don't need this anymore. I don't need to be afraid of this anymore. But I think that created an identity, in and of itself. Losing that church, having my dad die, losing that community, whatever the name for that identity was, it was different than who I had been beforehand, for sure.
Yeah, that's
and
huge.
A lot of it was afraid. I guess that's, if there's a word for it, maybe that's the word.
And you want to talk about an uncomfortable feeling. That is one of the most painful feelings I think you can be stuck in, because it's like a deep, dark hole, and it doesn't really feel like you could get out of that one.
Yeah. And even like the more I think about it now, I mean, I haven't really chewed on this in a long time, but the worst part of that is everything I thought about myself revolved around wanting to help people and being recognized as somebody that cared and wanted to help people. And that event, not just the letters, but the event, I was framed as somebody that might possibly hurt people or wouldn't care about people or would be in some ways that it would somehow, if I were to go back and tell the kids that would be painful for them, if I was to say
Or
goodbye
harmful.
to them, right, that I could be somebody that was harmful like that, that was my kryptonite. Nothing would have made me more afraid than being perceived as somebody that wasn't kind, that wasn't helpful, that wasn't caring. And again, because I was such a people pleaser, I was so driven by external validity, and I was receiving at that point so much external invalidity, if that's the right way to say that. Yeah, I was broken. It broke who I used to be, for sure.
Yeah, understandably so. I actually looked up before I got here, like what are the signs of like a positive community or something that helps you grow. And I wrote down a couple of them that I saw from this article that, knowing your story, I was like, these core things of what a community is supposed to do is missing from this situation, and many others that I've heard and even been a part of in my own experience. And one of them is freedom of expression, you know, so that was taken away from you. Fairness. How many people were in that room when you had to defend yourself by yourself?
12.
So you had 12 men.
But none of them were my advocate.
I'm
Like, that's the
guessing
other
they
thing
were all
I've
men?
learned.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening to this, do not go to a meeting like that without at least one more person who's not in the spotlight who can be like, here's something that isn't fair, right? Here's a different perspective.
Well, there's entrapment in that too, when you're thinking, oh, these people know who I am. This is a safe experience. We're just going to have like a quick conversation about, you know.
This thing that makes sense.
Right.
Like, I'm not trying to undo the deal. I just want to say goodbye. And they wouldn't let it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. The imbalance of power too is something that happens in a church, and many other systems too. If there's someone that's not so great at the top, you know, you can look at systems from a school all the way to the presidency. Like in a church though, specifically, we usually have deacons. In my experience, like growing up Baptist and non-denominational is all men. And then you have a head pastor and sometimes a co-pastor or whatever, but usually
all men.
All men.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I wanted to be a pastor as a kid, and I remember crying because I knew that would not be an option for me, because I'm a woman. But yeah, it's just not something you think about so much growing up in the church until you are in that situation where you're like, wait, everybody said they cared. Everybody said they were going to be fair. Another thing about a positive community is promoting interaction. So like having even Amy be told, you're not allowed to spend this individual time with these girls to pour into their lives.
Right. Make their life easier.
It doesn't align, right, with what a community actually is. And the last one was sensitivity to concerns and hearing people out. And it's funny because someone might say, well, you got 4 hours to explain yourself to other people, right? But, you know, 4 hours to a audience that's kind of mute to whatever information you give them is not really conversation at all. It's kind of more of just a standstill. So that sucks.
Definitely sucks. Definitely sucks.
Hey, you know, that wasn't fun.
No.
Could you tell me then how you and Amy were able, maybe not able is the right word, but like, what did you do next after that? And what did you do with your career? Because that must have put a little wrench in identity and
for sure
what your job is.
Yeah, I was pretty lost. I mean, when I think about that time period, I don't know that I was really looking for jobs. We'd only been in that town for maybe 18 months, 24 months, something like that. You know, we were looking actually to buy a house. I mean, that was such a blessing, so fortunate that we didn't, because we were thinking we'd be there for a long time, and we had been talking to a realtor, we'd been looking at a couple of houses. Thankfully, we only had a lease. So I guess that was part of it, is, you know, even our lease still had time left on it because we didn't imagine that we'd be leaving anytime soon. So I worked some temp jobs. I worked for the sweetest woman in the world, which was actually really helpful, at Cheyney College. It's a historical Black college right outside of Philadelphia.
Very cool.
And it was really, I mean, I look back at that and think, you know, that was really important, because I think I'd spent most of those next 6 months, I was just her assistant. Like she thought I was great because I could write a letter, put in a Word doc, put in an envelope.
Ooh,
like
my
little limited skills, she thought they were great, and she was really sweet, and then I was nice, and I think she appreciated that, you know, we were nice to each other. But she was, you know, older than retirement age, you know, very nurturing, very caring. But it was good for me to be on a college campus where I was maybe throughout the day one of 3 or 4 white people that I saw all day. Like, I was ready to think differently after everything that had happened about the world, about myself. I'd always thought of myself as being, you know, not racist, as being sensitive, being empathetic. I've redefined that now, so that I probably at that time I was mostly ignorant and naive. But that was really good for me to, you know, it was not a church environment, it was not a white environment, it was not a familiar environment, and it was really good. So But I wasn't even looking.
A different world too.
Yeah.
You're in a different world at that point.
Wasn't even looking for a church. And then out of the blue, my parents' pastor, the one way back in the day that my sister started going to his youth group, he found out what had happened to me, and he just called me up. And he said, I know of a church that just had a kind of a real negative experience with a youth pastor. He's like, they've been hurt. And he's like, I heard that you've been hurt. And he's like, maybe the two of you need each other. And even saying that now, like I haven't thought about that, but I get a little emotional thinking about what an amazing act that was. And I wasn't a part of his life, barely, my parents were, but he didn't have to do that. And he introduced me to this church in Illinois that was looking for a youth pastor. And I don't know what I would have done, honestly. We might have moved back closer to my wife's family. I might have gone into business. I mean, who knows? I have no idea. I was really lost. I was really broken. I guess that's the thing I would want people to think about. The identities, the communities we put ourselves in, that can frame our identity. I was out of the community, so I didn't have an identity. I mean, I was Amy's husband, but apart from that, I didn't know who I was anymore. So that church, it was in a kind of a small town, small city, I guess 30,000 people in Eastern Illinois. And the people at that church, especially the staff, the senior pastor, they had an assistant pastor too, so it was a little bit bigger than the church I'd been coming from, just cared about caring for people. Like they were nurturing, they were caring. I don't want to speak ill of him. If he wasn't your favorite preacher, he was the person you would want to come and visit you if you were sick, if you were hurt, if you were in pain. Like he was just such an empathetic soul. And then his assistant was brilliant. Like he did a lot of the counseling. He was, one of the smartest people I've ever met. He did that with type 1 diabetes. So he's constantly struggling with working on balancing his blood sugar and his health. And, those two men helped me find myself again. So I stayed as a pastor. We worked there, did that for 4 years. I always say that I can't get to what I got in Illinois without having to walk through what I walked through in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So I'd absolutely do it again in a heartbeat. That's where we adopted our daughter. So if I don't show up at that time in that place, whether you think that's God or just serendipity or sliding doors, I mean, that's the best door we ever walked to. She's been the joy of our life. So, and that church was like, I hate to yada yada it, but it was just such a sweet place, such a kind place, such a place for me to I feel like that's where I got to heal. I got to recover, find myself again. And so, I don't want to underplay that because when I left there, they treated me like I was a king. Like it was embarrassing a little bit how loving they were. I mean, it was like, like on TV, they give somebody like a lifetime achievement. I felt like that's what I was getting after 4 years. Like they couldn't have been better, couldn't have been sweeter. And I'm sitting here today because of them. That's the power of community, right? Like they took us in, they were who we needed at that time. And after a while, I guess I had a little more ambition. We wanted to move closer to my wife's family, kind of out here in New England. So ultimately, that's what brought us out to Connecticut was wanting to be closer to them. But I'll always be grateful for those 4 years because, that's what a community can do for you when it has some of the things that you're describing that go into a healthy community.
So we went through some pain, then we got some healing back into our lives, maybe the stability coming back into our identity a little bit, which feels good. And then you two moved to Connecticut. So what was happening for you once you moved there?
I think I would say I got my dream job. At least what I had always dreamed was my dream job. So I mean, you talk about the power of community. It was a community that broke me. It was a different community that healed me. And then, the community in Connecticut was great for a long time. It was really challenging. It was a much, much bigger church. I was in charge, much more responsibilities, dealing with many, many, many more families, more kids, more volunteers. So I grew it a lot professionally. I learned a lot from the people I was working with. It was like a staff of 20 as opposed to a staff of 2 or 3. So all those people I'm learning from, for a long time, it was great. And I felt like it wasn't without blips. It wasn't without struggle, but I thought, things were going really well.
What were you doing in that church that felt like the dream?
It was such a big church. I was just the high school pastor. So I was just working with high school kids. And I think this is where a lot of the stuff we've talked about kind of came to a head because I had always had a value that I want to be in a role where kids are loved, where they're cared for. I don't want to be just a mode of entertainment, of distraction. And I do think when I got here, that church was very used to their teenagers being distracted and being entertained. And so there were some huge fights and battles, not in the abusive way that we would have had at our first church, but just in a political way. Like there was a lot of kids not being happy because we're not having enough fun. I changed things to be a little bit more, like getting kids into smaller groups with adults that could kind of speak into their lives and be mentors and be there when they were having, because it was too big for me to have close relationships with all 150 kids. And so I tried to create an organization where that could happen. And it wasn't entertainment based. It was just the idea that life is hard, and especially when you're in high school, I think that can be some of the hardest years of our life. And so obviously from a Christian standpoint, it was a church. We want to teach them principles of the Bible, teach them teachings of Jesus, and we also want to be the ears and the mouth and the hands and the feet of the people that can care for them and get them through hard times and make sure they don't feel alone, and create those little kind of minor sub-communities where when they go to a house, there are people that know their name, and they're going to sit around a room, and they're going to have a brownie, and maybe they'll play a silly little quick game, but they're going to talk about life, and they're going to feel that great feeling of listening to somebody and encouraging them. And then if you have something that's hard, then you can talk about that, and maybe somebody encourages you. And like that, building some of the things that you just mentioned go into a healthy community, building it in groups of 10 or 12, because it's not really possible in 150.
Well, it's funny because me working at that church later, I was working in that system that you helped create, so I got to experience actually mentoring your daughter, of all people.
That was awesome.
So.
I was so excited that happened. You had asked me early on what my impression of you was, and I don't know if I ever gave that. Like, you were fantastically kind and incredibly fun. So that was so exciting to know that my daughter was going to go to that little sub community, and she was going to have somebody that was empathetic, that was kind, and was tons of fun, because she's pretty quiet. She and I, even though we might not share DNA, we share a soul. We are very much alike, and she's pretty quiet too. So I loved the fact that you were I knew, I didn't have to guess. I knew you were going to pull her out of her shell. You were going to make her do fun things. You're going to have loud, fun, boisterous,
And I can attest, she was boisterous at times, yes. As was I, though. I was, there was only one girl that kind of outdid me in boisterousness, and she was,
I think that's fantastic.
half the age.
That's awesome.
But, speaking of pastoring, that was kind of my opportunity to flex those muscles of going in front of a small crowd and kind of preaching the word in a little bit, because I ended up being in a group where the two other leaders I had were very introverted and did not want to speak to the kids. And at first we kind of talked about like, oh, we'll take turns and stuff. And then there was one week, I don't know what we were talking about, but I just, I'm sure everybody knows now, like I'm very passionate about certain subjects, and I can go on a very long trail, and I like to map things together in my head. So once we got to that small group, I remember like just standing up and kind of even walking around and speaking with my arms out and just making all of this
preaching,
right, like getting really into it. And I remember stopping at one point, and it was kind of like, that guy with all the red lines on the wall, and then I kind of just stopped and was like, and I remember looking at all the girls' faces, and they were almost like in a state of shock, because I don't know if they expected that out of me, and I don't know if I expected that either. Passion is talk about a family trait. Woo. But yeah, it was exciting, and it did mean a lot to have that small group in there, because you're right, you can't pull into those people in the same way when there's 100 people running around, especially for more introverted folks. And then something actually that rings true to me is on this trip, I spent a lot of time with people of different ages, and I've been in a lot of different groups, and I love to experience people. So at a party, I go up to someone random and I just learn who they are. And out of all these groups that I've ever been in, the thing I love the most about being in a church was, while you would, like you said, have your brownie at a friend's house and goof around, all of a sudden everybody was ready right. to be open, ready to say the hard thing, ready to be weak in front of others in a way, because
there's a support group aspect to it.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And especially when you get prayer involved, everybody has a prayer list, and you're talking about, your uncle that is dying in a bed, and your dad that you just lost, and all these other really hard things that in most other communities you don't feel comfortable talking about, or you're kind of looked down for doing that. But anyway, so it's kind of like getting to the point where you're now meeting me at this point, we're going to the college thing. And I remember at that time you were actually going to school. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so I don't know that I lost the battle for not entertaining kids, but I definitely didn't win it. So after a while, I moved positions in that church, and I got out of high school, and I started working with young adults who don't need to be entertained necessarily as much. And then I started getting to do care and counseling. There was this really interesting thing that happened where, because of the size of the group, I had tons of volunteers. I mean, I think I was training like 60 adults curriculum. It was really great. I got to write it. I got to train them. I'm a very much a sports nerd, and it felt like I got to be a coach to all these other coaches, maybe like a general manager, I guess. But one of those people was going through a hard time in their marriage, and for a reason, they didn't go to a therapist. They came to the church, and they didn't want to talk to another pastor. They want to talk to me. And I'm like, why do you want to talk to me? Like, I don't know I'm younger than you and I don't know anything. Like, but I think it was just that sense of comfort. And I guess they knew, I mean, I hope they knew that I was going to truly care. And so her and her husband and we sat and we'd meet. And I can remember at that time, there's one of my mentors. He is one of, if not the most brilliant man I've ever met. And he is a psychologist, but he's also a pastor. And he has a doctorate in psychology. So he's every bit a therapist and every bit, I mean, he's led institutes and brilliant. And for whatever reason, he was working at that church same time I was. And I would come in, I'd knock on his door and just say, teach me, lead me, what do I do? He'd give me books and I'd read them. And then I'd go back in and meet with that couple. And then, a week would pass and I'd go in and ask him questions and he'd give me books. And then I'd go run back in and try to help this couple. And I don't know how long that lasted, but actually, I guess it went pretty well. They felt satisfied, I guess. And I felt amazing. I had never really experienced that before, like a more formal counseling environment. And it just felt like I put on a glove that fit me that I'd never tried before. And so that had just happened and I was moving out of high school. And so that allowed me, I guess, the conversation to say, let me work with the older young adults and let me work in that care and counseling. And care is just like hospital visitations and funerals. And then, counseling as people could come in for free. Looking back on it, especially when they were meeting with me, I mean, when they're meeting with him, they're getting like one of the best people in the country, unbeknownst to a lot of them. But a lot of mine was just kind of intuitive, empathetic. I didn't know modalities. I didn't know psychology very well. I didn't know psychology very well necessarily. I was just being a listening ear and being reflective and trying to help. So when I met you, that was what I was doing. I was doing kind of half of each. And the more I did it, the more I liked it. And then simultaneously, I felt like my community was changing. And this is the one, like the part of anything that I might have to say that's the most uncomfortable because it's the most recent. I still care deeply for folks in that community. And I don't describe it to disparage anybody or anyone. I definitely feel like because of what I've told you, kind of what I've gone through, I was probably hyper empathetic. I think sometimes I'm too sensitive. And I think in that case, I felt our community changing before it looked like it was changing, before maybe other people were aware that it was changing. So, a lot of that has to do with the way that the country has gone, with the way that our politics has gone, kind of like you feel an earthquake before it happens kind of thing. And so that created this discomfort where I just thought, I don't know that I want to do this way where I don't really know what I'm doing, counseling people, but I'm just doing it intuitively. And I'm doing it in an environment where I'm becoming more and more uncomfortable. I was leading a particular worship service that was supposed to be for people who were younger, I guess. And maybe at that point I was young enough that, I could kind of be the MC or I could kind of lead it. And there were just things that were coming up here and there, not every week, but there were certain things that were being said, ways things were being said. There was just becoming an us and a them feeling. And I guess in this case, I'm much more proud of myself than I would have been back in Pennsylvania. I would voice that. I became, I think, maybe a pain for some people. Sometimes I'd voice it in ways they thought was inappropriate because, like you said, you're not necessarily supposed to contradict. You're not supposed to argue. And I did. And I think it was the way that contradiction was met was just beginning to solidify this idea that I don't know that I want to identify with this community. I guess that's what I would point to some of my growth is when I was 27, 28, I only identified through that social identity. I thought of myself only in that social environment or in that community environment. At that point in my life, I had amazing friends, just some of the best friends I could have ever asked for that none of them, maybe one of them went to church, but none of the other ones went to church. And we found a couple that we could trust and had community with them. And I still had my in-laws and I have community with them and I have my family of origin, my sister and my mom. And I can be defined by something broader than the community that I feel connected to. So I didn't feel that same fear. I can validate myself. I don't need your external validation for me to be quote unquote right. This is what I think. This is what I believe. And that's what I believe is wrong. So if you all don't agree with that, you don't have to validate it. I can hold that identity, that belief, regardless of other people maybe disagreeing or being upset or even pushing me away.
So at that time that you were doing that too and being a little more bold and decisive about what you would kind of stand on business with, I guess. You were also going to school at this time for social work, right?
Yeah, I have to give UConn credit. And it's hard not to sound trite because I think there's a lot of rhetoric nationally by our president and others who would downplay education, higher education. I probably am one of the people he would consider to be an enemy because of the progressive way that I think or the empathetic way that I think. And yeah, UConn definitely played a role. So I got a master's in social work at the age of 40 with a wife and a kid, a full-time job. Not sure how it happened, but it found a way. In that school, I was almost always the oldest in class. I was almost always of only one or two men. Sometimes I might be the only white, Christian, cisgendered, straight man, certainly of 40 at the school, if not in any given classroom. That exposure was incredibly important because combined with, I guess, my empathy and my readiness, and it was really good learning to just train myself to just be like, just shut up, Cort, and listen. And you know, I grew up obviously as a white guy, and unfortunately, when I say something, people listen more than they should, and they don't listen to people that don't look or have my demographic. My opinion comes from a certain perspective, but everyone else's opinion in here comes from not necessarily a different perspective, but all different perspectives. And being exposed to so many different demographics, so many different paths of life, so many different
viewpoints too at that point too, because going to seminary, I mean, you have differences of opinion there, but everybody's there.
But it's all about theology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's that through line. Had you ever really thought about that before going to that class? Did it kind of surprise you?
Definitely. I went to a class called Human Oppression, and it was my favorite class. I tried to remember her name. She has a hyphenated last name. I just looked her up on the internet. My favorite professor, one of them, first name's Lisa, but I know I should call her Doctor.
Yeah, well, shout out to Lisa. Yeah. Dr. Lisa.
She taught Human Oppression, and I mean, that was one of the first times I was ever introduced to what it would mean to be an anti-racist. One of the first times I've ever really come to some grips. I mean, I'm still a work in progress for sure, but that most of the terrible things that have ever happened in the world have been done by somebody that looks like me. And it just created this increased, I guess, or maybe focused compassion. It made me not take myself and my problems so seriously. All the things that I've described that are hard times in my life probably wouldn't measure on a lot of people's lives. And, you know, the thing about social work that's interesting, and I would add myself to this list, most of us that go into that probably go into it because we've been hurt and we want to go help other people that we know are probably getting hurt too. And that came across. Most of the people talk after class and people would talk about their pain. And I got to hear how much pain people had been in because of people like me, not just white guys, but Christians. And it was such a paradox and such a dissonance to work at a church during the day or 3 days a week and then go to school, because a lot of the pain is structural. You know, it's not even just individual situations like my anecdote and that pastor that treated me like crap, but it's also the structure that's been put into all the systems that we have in our overall community, like our community as Americans. We are in some ways the ugliest country that exists on the planet. And I had always thought of myself very pridefully. Like, I'm still proud, I guess. Maybe not a good word, but I still love Americans. I still love America. I still am that. But I'd always kind of, in a similar way to what I described at that church, I'd never given myself permission to think that what we're doing as a country is wrong, right? Same way I never gave myself permission to think that the church could do something wrong. When I was at UConn, it wasn't that I was forced to. I don't mean it that way. I was looking at it because I'd never allowed myself the permission to look at it differently and to look at it in a critical way, to look at our warts, to look at our sins.
What do you think that was?
Because I was afraid I would lose it. It's the same thing that kept me quiet. It's beyond quiet. It's like, I don't have permission to consider this because it would threaten my capacity or my involvement here. And I think as a white guy in a church, grew up in the Midwest, if I begin to question the way things are, if I begin to question this community, I might not have it anymore. And not to skip to the end, but that's what ended up happening.
Yeah. Okay, so you went to UConn and you were also doing some counseling at the church that you were at that time. And I know you did counseling outside of the church after that. I mean, I was there when you left to go to your new job. You know, we had to say goodbye, which really sucked because I was like, but you know, change is inevitable.
It sucked for me too.
Yeah, as much as I was happy for you, I was like, I wish you would stay, you know. But what was that like doing counseling outside of the church? How did that contrast what you had learned?
It was amazing, I guess, because I don't think I've ever done anything as well as I can do that. And so I feel really good about the way that I'm geared and built. I really like helping people. I really like nurturing them, caring for them, listening to them. And the other thing that UConn did is it gave me skills and education, so I knew how to do it. I wasn't just doing it intuitively and by chance maybe I said something right. Evidence-based scientific ways of helping people that are suffering from legitimate disorders. And it felt great to feel competent and to help people. And it also allowed me to help people that the church had always restricted me from. So go back 30 years and I'm this naive, I mean, I hate to use the word homophobe, but I can't call myself anything else other than that at that point in my life. And now I get the chance to sit down with someone who maybe is not cisgendered, is transgendered, is
A part of
gay,
that
lesbian,
community.
and I can help them make their day better. I can help them, address depression and anxiety, trauma, whatever it is. I know how to do that, and I think I can do that pretty well, and I can do that to anyone. I could still go back and I can help people who are white and Christian and male, but there's tons of opportunity for those folks. It felt really good to offer whatever skills I have to everyone, and especially to people that I think my previous self probably inadvertently caused a lot of pain to, or at least I was a part of an overall machine that caused them a lot of pain. I think what I am learning, even just talking to you, Phoebe, is, right now my identity, it's not perfect by any means. I'm living through an absolute struggle because when I left that church, I didn't voice it. I didn't want to create a revolution. I wasn't trying to get people to revolt. I mean, I left in 2016, just to give everybody a frame of reference. I left right after the election. I even tried to keep going to that church for a while as an attendee, and I couldn't. It just felt like things had changed. Like, I want people to know about God because I think he loves them. That's it. The only reason I ever wanted to be a pastor is because I thought it would feel good for someone to hear that, like, you don't have to be anything. You don't have to be straight. You don't have to be cisgendered. You don't have to be tall or short or skinny or fat. You don't have to be pretty or handsome. You don't have to be athletic. You don't have to be good at this or that or the other thing. In fact, the entire point of Christianity is that we are a mess. And the idea of Jesus is that he did all that he did because I'm a mess, out of that love. And I just wanted people to hear that. It had nothing to do with being in power. It never had for me anything to do with being, I don't know, whatever that word would be, being in some kind of authority or
Control,
being in control. That's a good word. That's the word I was looking for. And as I felt that controlling, forcing people, they have to live a certain way or they're a them versus an us, I felt that coming, and I couldn't even attend that church. It was uncomfortable, but also I still am dealing with a ton of guilt. In some ways, I struggle with thoughts that I failed, to be honest, in my life. And I know as a therapist, I can reframe that thought. I have the skills, know that that's not true. It's a feeling. I've done a lot of good things. Obviously, I have an incredible wife and fantastic daughter. And I know that I've loved a lot of people. A lot of people have loved me. You can't define failure with that. But I feel this sense of failure because I was a part of something that did and does and will hurt people. And that's the antithesis of who I want to be. So now getting to be a therapist outside of the church, I'm not constrained by any of that. I can help whoever. I can help somebody of a different religion. I can help somebody of a different anything, I guess, any demographic or any situation. And it's still painful because I would say that I've lost a lot of what I used to think of as my community. And, even just having this conversation, like thinking about those sub-communities or mini communities or whatever you want to call them, I think those can be incredibly important. If you can find a group of friends, like a chosen family, or even just a spouse, even if it's just the two of you or like a partner, that's your social identity, is the two of you know who you are in that group. That can be just as powerful as being a part of a nationwide political group.
Yeah. What the hell were we talking about? I know where we're going. It's okay. Woo! I got it. I'm back. Okay, so I was thinking about this before I came here, and while you were talking at the beginning, I was like, oh, I have a better ending. So I wanted to ask you first your view of what you think a calling is, or what your thoughts about people using the word saying they have a calling. What does that mean to you now?
I think that's a dangerous word. Actually, one of the things that I've learned in my psychology education is the importance of not thinking in absolutes, right? Those are the thoughts that make us angry, afraid, depressed, guilty, right? Saying all of something, none of something, always, never, catastrophizing, awfulizing. Those are the thoughts that dysregulate us emotionally. That's why we get scared and mad and depressed. And that, I think, at least to me, maybe everybody doesn't use this the same way. That's what that word calling meant to me, is that it was an absolute. It was something that was all or nothing. I couldn't change. Even looking back at that period of time in Pennsylvania, in between resigning and then getting to move to Illinois, I don't know that I gave myself permission to think about doing something else, because that idea of calling meant that I couldn't do anything else. I didn't have God's permission. And I would counsel anybody, I would advise anybody, be careful, maybe don't use that word. That's something I wanted to do. I felt good about doing it. I was excited to do it. I didn't think of myself as being a pastor for a job. I didn't think of myself as working at a church. I thought of myself as a pastor. It was like an identity. And I just think that that was a really unhealthy way to look at it. Doesn't mean you can't work for a church and help people and do all those things, but you are more than that. The breadth of your identity goes beyond that. And I think that's important to think of myself as like, I'm Cort, and I did pastor a church for a while. I pastored kids for a while, and I'm still Cort, even though I'm not doing that anymore.
Well, that kind of gives me a little more perspective too of what it was like for you at 28 to lose that pastoral job, right? Especially if that's where your core of who you are is built.
For sure.
You know, that is the foundational block that gets pulled out from underneath you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an all or nothing sort of situation, sort of way of living. And I used to be that way, I would say, more than most of my friends or even family sometimes. But it's kind of funny because now that I've changed personally also, I love to tell people my favorite thing about what I am now is okay with the unknown. Because before that would freak me the hell out. I hated it. It made me feel sick to my stomach. And now it's like, isn't it great that I don't know everything?
Yeah.
It's so nice, you know, unexpectedly, really, because I was very fearful before when you live in a world of absolutes, because when you don't have the absolutes, that's where uncertainty creeps in and you feel like you're on uneven ground and that anything could slip away from you and that things are scary.
Yeah.
And that fear really settles in and you kind of want to avoid it at every point, which makes you look for more absolutes.
Yeah, I think it goes into the idea of self-defense, right? You go into a self-protective mode because every unknown you suspect, right? You suspect it's a bad thing. And once you get into that self-protective mode, then the next unknown becomes a bad thing. I talk about this card game that we play where the lowest score wins, and part of the game you spend with the cards pointed down, and everybody always assumes that those cards you can't see are bad cards. Sometimes they're exactly the card you need to win the game. And I think that's a great analogy for, I know what I went through is every unknown became, there's no way that that's not going to be a bad thing. Like you're saying, you have to know, because to not know means it's something bad. I never could have imagined I was going to get to go to Illinois and adopt this amazing little girl. When I was coming home from that meeting in Pennsylvania, bawling my eyes out, not knowing where I was going to go, there was a big old card in the middle of the table that was going to be the best card that's ever been played for me and my wife. So yeah, we didn't have to know, and it was far from bad. It was great.
That's awesome. What do you think Americans need right now, and why should they continue to look for community?
I can't question the importance of community. I mean, it's critical to us as humans. And, you know, I think it could be something as simple as being like, I'm a Cardinals fan, but there's a lot of Red Sox fans around. That's a sense of social community, social identity, right? You identify with the people that wear the same hat that you do. I think what's important is to be internally validated enough that if your community begins to act and speak in a bad way, and I would say in a ghoulish way, that you can survive leaving that community, you can find a different form of community. That internal validation is worth giving up a community that acts ghoulish. And I think that's the idea, is to be careful not to engage in a community that maybe doesn't fit your values and isn't in line with the way that you see the world and identify with the world. But if you find yourself in one, it's okay to leave and you can survive it. It'll be incredibly difficult. It's like the scaffolding of a building falling down is how it feels. But once the dust settles, there are other opportunities and you can live with yourself. And I think the alternative is worse. Being in a community that doesn't represent your values, I think that the only way to do that is to go back to where I was and not give yourself permission to question the community, to question what's happening. So, I mean, I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot about this for these last 10 years since I left the church and all the things that have happened in the MAGA movement. And it's hard for me to understand how so many people that I love and respect, how they could support someone that acts so ghoulish. And the best, I guess I have, or best imperfect understanding, is that there are a lot of people who had ties to that community through their church, through the Republican Party, through their kind of political past. And I am a recovering Republican. I mean, I grew up as a Republican, so I'm in recovery. And I can understand how you can find yourself being kind of drawn, the tentacles drawing you into that movement because of the connections. But I think there's a lot of people that won't allow themselves to question it because they might lose it. They might lose that community. And I would say in the meantime, so many people are being hurt by it. Unfortunately, I guess, sounds weird to say that. Unfortunately, I'm not being hurt by it because of the way I look, because I'm married to a woman and because, you know, I'm not of the demographic that they create a them out of. But there's so many people that are being hurt, that are being othered, that are being made to be afraid. If I could do anything, I wish I could talk to the people that I used to be in a community with. And we're talking hundreds of people, some of which I'm related to even. I wish I could get them to give themselves permission to question. You know, it happened for me early. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else, but when he made fun of the disabled reporter, I'm like, nope, I'm not in his group. And I think it was only because I gave myself permission. That's all. I mean, earlier parts of my life, I didn't give myself permission to do things like that. So I think, honestly, what I would point back to is being exposed to pain, as bad as those events were in my life. That gave me a platform, or that led me to a place where I could give myself permission to question. So that exposure, and then education. Getting that master's just taught me a lot about the world, about myself, about what maybe would have come naturally, where I like to speak against things I think are wrong. It gave me sort of that intellectual, historical, almost empirical validity of like, yeah, we as a country, we've done a lot of bad things in our past. And I always believed we were moving towards a better place. And now it's like we're moving back. We're moving to a third place that's as bad, or wants to be as bad. And I can't not speak out against it. Like, I don't know how to speak out against it very well. I don't know where to put my energy. I don't know how to help. I don't know how to fight. But I'm not fighting my former community. I'm fighting for them, because they're in a community that deserves to be questioned. And I have a hard time believing, if they gave themselves permission to question it, if they really are people who want others to feel loved, that they want the teachings of Jesus to be expressed, I still have hope that they questioned it. They might see the answers, and they might change. They might leave support of him. It's not even just him, but of that entire movement. But I think the power of community is really strong. Yeah, right now it's only it's kind of a hope, and I'm not sure where to point it, but it's there.
Well, you know, I've had a couple people tell me that I'm pretty naive and a little childish, based on the personality I have and how much I love to play. And I go, it doesn't actually really matter to me what other people think. And people might find myself too naive or too boisterous or something, but at the core of who I am, I'm willing to realize that you can hold two things to be true. You can have a silliness about you, but you can also find it very important to deal with hard things. And I think a lot of us are kind of in a place where we really don't want to deal with those hard things. We want someone else to kind of take care of those hard things for us. And in my opinion, I think we're at a place where we really shouldn't be looking up to that head pastor for that advice. We shouldn't be looking to just one person to solve all of our issues, because it's putting a lot of trust in someone that we don't know fully. And still learning a lot about myself and about the community I want to be a part of. But what I do know is that I don't want to let go of the people that have been the good part of the community, including you. And, it's so easy to be on your, but it's so easy to be on your phone and lose hope immediately. It just takes a couple scrolls, really. But talking to people like you and talking to people in the real world, I think we would all realize we're not all so different, and we all experience our own pain, whether that's big pain, small pain, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Pain is pain. I just think if we listened a little bit more and talked a little less, maybe just forgave ourselves for not being so perfect, and especially others that have harmed us. It's a big lesson. It's hard to do, but it's definitely worth it. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a world where I'm just angry all the time.
Right.
I want to understand, and I want to be right, of course, but more than that, I want the truth to be first and foremost above my opinion. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't grapple with in their lifetime. So.
Yeah, I think as humans, we are similar in all the important ways, right? We are alike in everything that's important, and we are different in really fun and interesting and great ways. And I think pluralism in America, I think, could be our greatest strength if people would just stop being afraid of the unfamiliar, things that are not.
Yeah, kind of each other.
Yeah.
We
all want to, be in families. We all want to be healthy. We all want to be
cared for, seen and heard.
Yeah, we all want the same things. I think that one of the things that America has as a potential is like so many different flavors of that. We could be amazing. It could be the greatest country in the world, but we have to stop being afraid of each other. And I think we have to speak out when somebody is unkind. I keep using the word ghoulish because his unkindness is in the stratosphere, but I think that's all we're saying is like, let's just be for each other who we'd want people to be for us.
I also want to make a distinction, because I remember taking very many things that people would say online personally, and then remember really trying to think about what someone said instead of how it made me feel. And I started to realize that, maybe if it feels so personal, maybe it's something, one, I have to either work on, or two, maybe I'm taking everything a little too personally and close to home and making it a lot more about me than it is an issue at large, whatever that may be. I don't know where community is at this point for me either. It comes and goes really in our life. And I don't know what the perfect identity is. I don't know what the perfect religion is. I don't know what the perfect truth is, but I'm open and willing to find out. You're a good example of how to be that way. But yeah, I just think anyone listening out here, if you're offended, guess what? I've been offended too by what Cort has put out there in the past. The more I look back at it, the more I realize that you weren't trying to be right at any cost. You were trying to warn. And I appreciate every time you spoke up in the church and every time you spoke up in your personal and professional life also, because it does mean a lot to the people that we're trying to help. And that's really what matters. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a good thing. That's
it
a great
okay?
thing. Yeah.
I feel like this is going to be like the longest conversation.
Oh, no, there's other people that are longer.
It's like a This Is My Life as opposed to just talking about community.
Oh, that's what happens when you're a little older, Cort. There's more of a story to tell.
A lot of story. 53 years to tell.
I'm going to clap again so I know what the hell is going on.
Oh, so the audio's still recording?
Oh, yeah.
Then I guess I can't talk crap about Connor.
Oh, damn.
I have to wait
Well, you can. Who said I had to share this with him, you know?
Right.
I talk crap about him right to his face. It's fine. It's all good. He gives it right back to me, too. Thank goodness.